Hello and welcome to everyone watching. My name is Raven Crossing and I'm back for some reason. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to be talking about a show on Netflix, small production, probably never heard of it. It's called Castlevania Nocturne, otherwise known as the direct sequel to one of Netflix's most successful animated properties that they didn't buy from some poor Japanese studio that couldn't air it on TV. In all seriousness, the first Castlevania series was a huge hit for Netflix. It did really well both critically and with audiences. So naturally, when they announced Castlevania Nocturne, I don't think anyone was outwardly displeased with the news. And then it came out, and the reaction was pretty polarizing. Critics seemed to absolutely love it, but audiences were fairly split on it. The critic score on Rotten Tomatoes right now sits at a solid 100%, whereas the audience score is sitting at 45%. Yikes. So I decided to watch the show for myself, and I gotta be honest, it's not very good. So what is the show actually about? Well, the official description is, as revolution sweeps France, Richter Belmont fights to uphold his family's legacy and prevent the rise of a ruthless, power-hungry vampire ruler, known as the Vampire Messiah. Sounds like some epic shit, doesn't it? And by golly gee, I wish that was the show that I watched. You get bits and pieces of that, especially towards the end, but overall just not a very good start to the series as a whole. So let's get the good stuff out of the way first. The art and animation are pretty good. Sometimes it's even excellent. I do think some of the action scenes every now and then are a little choppy, and with the more benign scenes, it does feel like they kind of cut back on the animation in very bizarre ways. Characters' movement becomes very choppy. There's not a whole lot happening visually, that kind of thing. The action scenes are really cool though. They're very well animated, very well choreographed, and yeah, they're immersive. What can I say? I like them a lot. The score is also really good. That was one of the big things with the first Castlevania that I personally really, really liked. I thought the score for those first 4 seasons were amazing. So it's cool to see that carried over here. Sound design is also really good. A lot of attention to detail in that respect. And there are some pretty good vocal performances throughout the series. Also, the character of Ulrox in the show, he's a villain-ish character that pops up at the beginning of the show, and he makes sporadic appearances as the show goes on. He is easily the best character in the show, both in terms of his presence and in terms of his writing. I think he's easily the best part about this first season. That about wraps it up for me for the pros for the show, so let's go into the cons, what I really do not think work very well. First off, this show is very sloppily written in terms of its plot. A lot of it is very nonsensical and contrived. Characters make decisions that don't really make any sense. They find themselves in circumstances with little to no explanation whatsoever, and they are very conveniently written out of those situations in manners that, in my opinion, just don't make much sense most of the time. And the overall structure of the show and its pacing feels very inconsistent and boring. The show simultaneously moves too fast and too slow in different segments of the story. Personally, I think the first episode moves way too fast. We don't get any time to kind of chill with our characters and get to know them as people. But then there are other episodes where they spend damn near the whole episode on one particular thing that is frankly not very important to the overarching story. And the characters for the most part are really boring, with the exception of Ulrox, Richter Belmont, Annette, Richter's friend Maria and her mother, who is Russian, I guess. They are all remarkably boring characters. I had no emotional attachment to any of them, despite the show's several attempts to kind of force their way into my heart. Especially with Annette, she gets more backstory than Richter Belmont does, and he's supposed to be the main character of the show. Speaking of Annette's backstory, there is a lot of really lazy political commentary throughout this series. I mean, really, they dedicated a whole episode to one particular political statement that I don't think was needed. And that is not helped by the fact that most of the dialogue in this show is really bad. It is so unnatural and expository and nonsense. I mean, I don't even know what these people are talking about half the time. These weird scenes where they're trying to make characters have witty banter back and forth just come across as really cringy and not clever at all. Most of the voice acting in the show feels really stiff and under-directed. Unless they're actually showing emotion, it's usually really over the top, and, you know, it doesn't really fit with the lines they spoke 10 seconds ago. And there's a lot of really forced and cringy emotional beats throughout the show. For example, there's a character named Edouard. He is an associate of Annette. They're very tight, they're homies, and his whole thing is that he used to be an opera singer. So every time the writers think they're trying to do something emotional or impactful, he just kind of starts singing, even in situations where he definitely shouldn't be. The best way I could describe a lot of those sequences are ill-timed and unnecessary. And man, there is some weird moments of cultural appropriation where the writers have gone out of their way to, shall we say, reinterpret an aspect of a certain culture that I personally found to be really culturally insensitive and kind of disrespectful, to be completely honest. And I'm surprised more critics aren't addressing it. Also, this show is too goddamn horny. People just be throwing innuendos at each other. Certain characters' titties just be out, you know, just casually. Not all the way, but, you know, like, you know, they're almost there. Again, that goes back to the bad dialogue where people are trying to have witty banter, and of course it turns sexual, because why wouldn't it? I have one final negative point about the show, and I'll admit this is very much so a bit of a nitpick. Some of the characters feel a little over-designed. There's one character in particular that looks like she's out of a Michael Jackson video, and I just don't think it was period accurate enough to not take me out of the show. Now, I know that's coming from a series like the original Castlevania, where, you know, I highly doubt that any of those costumes were, you know, period accurate, but they weren't overdone, and they never took me out of the world that the show was creating. However, in Castlevania Nocturne, there were a couple characters that when they showed up on the scene, I was like, okay, that's a look. Alright, that's interesting. Whether or not that's a bad thing, that's ultimately going to be up to you. And hey, if you're watching this, maybe you love this show, and, you know, who am I to take that away from you? If a piece of media brings you joy, I say more power to you. That being said, I genuinely did not enjoy this series. Honestly, overall, I just thought Castlevania Nocturne was a very well animated mess. I'm just not sure where they were trying to take this. It's a very bizarre series of decisions in terms of narrative and character work, and just structure in general. It's so random at times. There's no real build-up to any particular moment or scene. Things just kind of happen. And that wouldn't be such a big problem if the characters weren't as uninteresting as they are. Oh my god, I completely forgot. The way they introduce most characters in this show is just some of the laziest writing I've ever seen. Characters literally just show up and they're like, hey, we're gonna go do this thing, and the other character's like, oh dude, yo, that's crazy, bro. We're on the way to do the same fucking thing. You trying to team up? And they're like, oh, word up, brother. We're homies now. We're the best of friends. There's a lot of that, and it's one of the many things that contribute to this show being just a overall very frustrating experience, especially since the first series was so good. So yeah, to wrap all this up, I thought Castlevania Nocturne was a very disappointing experience, to be completely blunt. And at the end of the day, good animation does not save a story that is sloppy, lazy, and contrived. And for that reason, I am giving Castlevania Nocturne Season 1 a 3 out of 10. Anyway, that's all I got for you today. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see all of you in the next video. Have a wonderful day.